Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We're just going to wait a little minute or two to let as many people in as possible. Whilst we're waiting for people to join, it would be really nice if you can pop in the chat where you're from and what your role is. That would be lovely to see, just so that we get a feel for the people who are on the call today. Hi, Gwen. Big issue. Nice. See a familiar name there. Lee, you're typing away. Nice to see you from Paradigm. Mixture of councils. We've got Chris from Forest District Council. Lovely. Portsmouth City Council. Slough Borough Council. Oh, nice mixture of housing associations and local authorities. Excellent. Oh, hi, Guy. Nice to see you. We met a few weeks ago. All right. I'm conscious of time and we're going to be getting quite a lot of really useful information from a number of our lovely colleagues in the housing sector. So I think we will get started. This session is going to be recorded and you will get a copy of the slides afterwards and a beautiful recording so that you can watch our dulcet tones afterwards if you feel the need to. But without further ado, what I would like to do is I'll introduce myself first of all and then hand over to my lovely colleagues, Sarah and Rona. But today's session is doing more with less, digital solutions for housing support in tough times. Quite a wide arching sort of a discussion piece, but we've got really great industry leaders to talk about it from their perspective. So Sarah from the CIH, and I'm not going to introduce on behalf of Sarah, so she can do her own thing, and Rona from Link Housing to talk about it from a much more practical local level as well. But yeah, let's get started, and I'm going to share my screen and bring the slides up and get going. Just with just to make sure, because I won't be able to see the full screen, can somebody give a thumbs up if they're able to see those slides, okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Okay, and you can see the full screen, just to make sure that I'm not giving you any spoiler alerts. Excellent. Okay, so welcome. I'm just going to introduce myself and a little bit about Lightning Reach in the first instance, and then we can get into the nitty-gritty of it. So my name's Gemma Glass. I am the partnerships lead for housing associations for Lightning Reach, and I'm going to say I'm shiny and new to Lightning Reach because I started in January. I think I can milk it for a little bit longer, but I previously have a background in social housing from a local authority and housing association perspective. My most recent role was to lead on Head of Financial and Digital Inclusion at Southern Housing. I also chaired the G15 Cost of Living Group and really came to Lightning Reach because I truly believe that it's part of a solution to a complex landscape. A little bit about Lightning Reach is that we are a fintech for good startup, making it easy for people to access a wide range of personalised support. We're backed by really nice investors. We've got the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Big Issue Invest, and others, as you can see on the screen there. But what we really do is enable individuals or support workers to find stuff that's super relevant to them. And we're going to look at that in much more detail throughout today's webinar. To date, we're really proud. We've actually facilitated over £20 million worth in grants to individuals with more than 200,000 users. So we're getting a really, really good broad base with the people that we're supporting. Lightning Reach itself is a digital portal, and I thought I would tailor it, like it depends on what sector you slice it up by, but from a housing association perspective, the average support is about £700 awarded for an individual, and I'm going to tell you more about what that means in real life for one person later on in the webinar. But what we're really super proud of as well is that people will always be matched to at least something, and it's super easy to use, taking about 12 minutes to complete the platform information. We really describe it as a tell us once approach where an individual completes it, but then the information is pulled from our portal to relevant support areas also. Looking at the challenges that we've got, it's a difficult one because I don't know about you. I don't know if you saw my post on LinkedIn earlier in the week, but from April, we saw lots of press coverage about awful April and how things are all in the rise in the context of how it's super tough out there for individuals. But then in preparation for this webinar, I started to look for headlines to do a little screenshot dump for you guys. And I was really surprised to see that there's not as much, but that's really not what I hear when I'm speaking to housing associations on a daily basis about the challenges that individuals are facing. And also it just seems to be like, okay, inflation's changing and so therefore the cost of living crisis is over. I was interested to find actually that there's now a new group of Labour MPs. They're called the New Living Standards Group, and it's a bunch of the newly elected people. That's your picture on the left-hand side, who are pushing the Labour government to really look at this in much more detail and come up with better policies around that. So there's definitely still behaviour out there about it. And I thought that the right-hand slide there was super interesting in that it shows you the track of where costs have gone. This is from the Joseph Rowntree, the Resolution Foundation, sorry. And you can see there the purple one, the highest one is energy, and spike was in 2023, which I think, you know, as professionals, we can always feel, yeah, that's where it felt like we were in the depths of it. It hasn't gone down. Look at the way that things are still remaining high. And I'm sure my lovely colleague Sarah is going to go on to that in much more detail. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who will look at it from the CIH perspective. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks ever so much, and thank you for the invitation to come and talk to you about this. So I'm Sarah Davis, Policy Manager with the Chartered Institute of Housing. So for those who perhaps don't know us, we are the professional body for individuals working in housing, so working for local authorities, working for housing associations, in consultancy or in academia, etc. So that's our main constituent is obviously professionals themselves, and so obviously they're often the people who are going into homes and really talking to people who are experiencing that kind of crunch on their living conditions and struggling to pay rent, wondering whether to heat or to eat, etc. So we know that there's been a significant challenge for the sector, but also for the staff themselves, whether from their own like income and outgoings rate, but also in the ongoing day-to-day talking to people who are really experiencing this crunch. So we've looked a lot at what housing organisations are doing, because one of the things about the sector is it recognises it's about more than a roof over people's head, and it's very much about keeping that roof over people's head and making it into a home. So we'll be going through a little bit of that. So if you can go to the next slide, that'd be marvellous. Thank you.
I'm trying to bear with. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So what I'm here to talk about today really is that policy context, as you might expect from me. So a cost of living crisis, is it old or is it new? You know, was it just in 2022 or 23? Or was it further back than that? And I'm going to argue, obviously, that the sector has felt, has known that its tenants have been experiencing a crunch quite some way before that. And also the other issue, is it gone or is it ongoing? So Gemma referred to the fact that there's not a lot in the news, but there's a lot when you're talking to staff still dealing with tenants. And I think there's a good reason for that. We've got a lot, we know that the news moves on. We've got a lot of positive headlines for housing just recently, but we do know from the day-to-day experience that people are still really facing a lot of difficulties in those financial decisions they have to make. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the headline issues and the context for that cost of living crisis, looking from a benefits perspective, because that's very much how, in response to the external pressures from, for example, energy or from food has increased massively the cost of food. In response to the context that we can't change, what can we change? And that's about how we support our tenants to sustain their tenancies and helping them with the financial inclusion agenda and helping them maximize their income through benefits is a big way. So it's about what's in our gift to actually manage. And so along with that comes the need to make sure that you know your tenants. And we're looking at digital solutions today to the cost of living crisis, but actually the digital agenda is a way that we can understand our tenants a lot more as well. So going to touch on the drive to know your tenants, as well as looking at some examples of the support that's coming through the sector before Rona comes and gives that in much more detail. So next slide, please, Gemma. So I would argue that the cost of living crunch, maybe not the crisis, but a crunch came much earlier than the energy crisis in 2023. And I think a lot of landlords were gearing up for potential problems for their tenants and themselves right back to 2010 with the welfare reform agenda that came in. Because that introduced a lot of challenges both for tenants and residents to become acclimatised to, but also potential risks for landlords in terms of shifts and how they needed maybe to support tenants who would be affected by some of those significant welfare reforms. And obviously a lot of that was introduced we're still living with today. So 2010 saw the advance of the government's agenda of welfare reform. So the introduction of universal credit, the way that benefits were paid to people, amalgamating benefits, giving it to tenants directly, including housing benefit as part of that universal credit. You know, there was significant challenge for a lot of tenants there in terms of having to manage over a month all of their benefits, including making sure they pay their rent, where very often they might not have had that before. And I think a lot of landlords were aware that that could produce problems for them and that maybe they didn't actually know enough about their tenants to help them through it. So I think that kick-started landlords thinking about, we need to know more about our tenants, we need to understand the composition of households and how that might affect them, and understand what support they might need through the introduction of welfare reform measures, particularly if they were affected by some of the other elements that came in. So, for example, back in 2023, we had the spare room subsidy, aka the bedroom tax, and that was on for working people where they were required only to have bedrooms for the number of their household. So if children were of the same sex, or if they were young, even of different sex, you know, in terms of the bedroom calculations, and if they had a spare room, obviously the rent was capped at that amount. I think it hit a lot of disabled people, which I probably wasn't thought about, but a lot of disabled people who might have needed carers, maybe not all the time, but occasional carers coming in, or who simply had a lot of medical equipment to help them sustain their daily life, you know, who often, you know, were relying on that extra bedroom just to give a bit more quality to their life. So, you know, it did affect more than was expected. The benefit cap, which set the upper limit on the amount of total benefit a household could receive. Interestingly, in the light of what's been happening more recently, there were some exemptions for that if you had certain benefits, such as attendance allowance, DLA or PIP, which is something that's very interesting. We come on to the fact that some of these changes still are ongoing. And obviously reform to the disability living allowance, the move to shifting to personal independence payments. And then in 2012, a significant one that has caused problems for people in the sector, the 2-child limit, which was the means tested support extending only to the 2-children limit, which is still in place. Although I think there's a softening on the language around it, but government hasn't committed to reducing that in spite of its committed drive to end some of the poverty, particularly for households with children. But that limit is still in place, and that has been a significant driver for larger families in terms of cost crisis. So it's a recent report and analysis of it by the LSE, for example, has said that it's affected about 1.5 million children. 1 in 10 children are in families that are affected by that. It's led to a sharp increase in poverty and hardship, and has a limited knock-on impact that was that government felt that would lead to changes in terms of, obviously, family size. It's not necessarily impacting on that. Employment rate or working hours, which is, I think, where some of the expectation was that people would actually increase their employment working hours. But often people are also limited by their own health or their children's health, the cost of childcare, the impacts on mental health. So it hasn't had the impact to drive up employment or working hours, and it has increased poverty. And then, of course, we also entered an era of austerity that affected public services. And then we had COVID with the quite dramatic impact that we were all trying to respond to in the best way possible in terms of the immediate impact. So I would argue that it's really been far more longer term that we've been dealing with a cost of living crunch that has escalated and accumulated into a crisis when some of the energy issues hit. So landlords did respond with the challenges that came with welfare change, being aware that a lot of tenants, obviously within social housing, are in receipt of benefits in some sort. They would be working but actually have health issues. This means they were in response in receipt of PIP, which is about additional costs that disability causes. So they knew that they needed to know more about their tenants to target support. So a lot of landlords at that point were contacting tenants, mapping their issues, mapping the vulnerabilities for potential vulnerabilities for tenants to these income restrictions, and doing a lot around trying to help people understand financial support, what benefits they might be entitled to that perhaps they'd never actually tried to access. And then, of course, came COVID, and that really concentrated the mind around we've got a lot of tenants who would be vulnerable, a lot of tenants who would be isolating. How do we make sure that we are supporting them within this, sort of unknown element of we were going into? Nobody really knew what would be happening. So increased welfare checks then, a lot of landlords bringing in all of their staff. So for the first time, perhaps back office staff coming to have a connection with tenants via telephone conversations or etc. to understand what people were facing and to recognise the kind of gaps in support. And I think then a lot increased around digital advice that landlords were giving out, and trying to increase the connection with their tenants through digital means, through social media, through telephone, just through multiple channels to understand more about their tenants and who was really experiencing some difficulties and what they could do in support. And then, as Gemma has indicated, that energy crisis that came in 2022-23 that really hugely escalated the costs that tenants would be facing, and it did have that energy focus. And that's where we started to see solutions such as that Lightning Reach provides. Landlords were trying to find ways to either give advice themselves or signpost to advice, but also to find ways that people, to provide solutions to people, and that included sort of prepaid vouchers for energy. We see a lot more of that now, but also advice on how to switch your energy providers and wider financial advice. So it kind of ramped up where we were at. We still had a lot of people who felt that they didn't want some of the face-to-face contact. So it, actually having that digital response made people feel safer as well in some cases. So we've seen a real shift to that. So I wanted to give an example from a landlord that this started really with before 2010, because we've always had a sense of needing to support tenants, because the social sector is obviously there for those who are in the greatest need, and it has become increasingly so as the social sector became smaller. that to actually qualify, people had to have quite distinct needs. So landlords have always been doing a lot to try and help their tenants understand their rights to benefits or to support for education and employment support. So in communities, which is in the Yorkshire and Humber area, they've been doing some financial advice and support initiatives back to the welfare reform age, to 2010. So it started with connections with local job centres in terms of helping people maximise benefits, but also look at employment to try and address the income crunch through advice, through coaching, and through signposting. But they soon brought that back into developing a whole in-house service entitled Money Matters Service, which looked at a wide range of support on the finance side for tenants. So it provides financial and budgeting advice, benefits recovery, which is ensuring people have all they're entitled to, because remarkably people still really don't, people still don't always take up what they're entitled to, and we see that perhaps around pension credit. Recently we've seen that move to push pension credit, and obviously in terms of helping people with benefits, it naturally pushes a digital kind of response, because it's helping people navigate some of that online digital requirements around benefits. But they also looked at issues such as household essentials and furniture, energy top-ups. Energy top-ups is a really critical one. Emergency food and toiletry supplies, and we know that some people moving into the social housing sector from homelessness really don't have the essentials they need for living. So there's increasingly, how do you support people with that? And more recently, because this is an ongoing service, had a lot of training for staff on the issues around pension credit to make sure that their older aged customers aren't falling into poverty and debt. So you can see that with all of those, there's a mix of digital and in person. Next slide, please.
Sure, that's 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, thank you. So we're still in it. It's ongoing. It's not gone. So we've seen the drive around pension credit. Pension credit is going to be brought in for tenants, for older persons now, in the same way universal credit. And we have the UC and PIP payments bill, which has caused a lot of a stir, as you can imagine. I mentioned briefly around government focus on reducing poverty, but we still need to see some of the main drivers. We still need to see whether there's going to be a change on that. The two-child limit and the benefit cap, which was only last increased 2023. Next slide, please. I'll pass over this given the time, but it is worth actually being aware that with the housing costs that are going to go into pension credit, we are not yet sure around whether they'll follow UC rules or housing benefit rules and what that might mean for people's income. And obviously it's starting perhaps within 2026. And, obviously being aware of the age demographics of your tenants, because with the changing state age, it's a question of when people will be moving into this. So do be aware of that as well. Next slide, please. So it's not just your working age tenants. Just to look a bit about PIP and UC reform, we know that that's in a state of turmoil, because it was had a big sense of people moving the goalposts around this, and suddenly what would that mean for a lot of people who rely on UC health element, but particularly PIP, because obviously that actually is an in-work benefit. It's not actually tied to being in employment or not. It's about the extra cost for disability, and we know that disabled people are a significant portion of our tenants, and a significant portion of our tenants who are facing real extreme costs. Next slide, please. And the interesting kind of dynamics going on about that is largely because if you look at this, in the top 100 constituency where there was a higher proportion of people on health-related benefits, only 8 aren't held by the Labour Party, so Labour government. So, it's a significant hit for some of their areas with this change. Next slide, please, if that's okay. So the idea between the change to this was balancing out the health element and the standard rate, and it was going to be tied to a single assessment, which was common for PIP, but that was meant to shift payment and most support towards those with the most severe conditions. But it did, but some good things were introduced with it as well, such as starting work would not necessarily trigger an immediate assessment. But obviously there's a real challenge about how it would hit a lot of people who are in receipt of this because of health conditions, mental and physical. Next slide, please. So the focus on the most severe was the shift to a requirement to get PIP to having 4 points in one activity compared to, at the moment, 8 points from 10 activities. And you can see how that would focus on the most severe cases. But a lot of modelling, and I would recommend taking up a look at what Joseph Rowntree have done, because they've done a lot of modelling about where that would really fall. And one of the positive things is that there is now a commitment to a further consultation on what that PIP assessment, which will be the assessment, will actually lead to with the TIMS review. Next slide, please. But what I suppose I'm saying by this is we're still in that state of flux and we're not sure exactly where it will land. So there's still a increasing drive to actually be aware of our tenants and their needs. Now, that fits both in terms of our regulators' requirements under its consumer standards, where it's saying be aware of the diverse needs of your tenants so that you can actually make sure you're giving a fair and equitable outcome in terms of your housing and your services to your tenants. So the drive to know your tenants is still there. Know who's behind the front door. And obviously there's been a lot of work by CIH and the NHF under its Better Social Housing Review to look at how we engage with tenants and how we make sure we hear their voices. So I mentioned a digital kind of digital solution is about knowing your tenants and using all of the information you have, whether through the consumer standards, through your interactions with tenants, and also through your kind of engagement where you have people going into tenants' homes, to make sure you're drawing those together and understanding what the range of your tenants and what they need. And so I'd recommend thinking about some of the sector is looking at how it connects systems and gathers customer insight, because often we have multiple systems. Do they talk to each other to help us understand the home and who's in the home? And Amplius, who used to be Grand Union, has done a lot of work around customer segmentation. So it's about understanding the groups of tenants and what their needs are. And what it's helped them to do is shape how they design services and interaction with those tenants. So particularly, for example, the issue that they had not a lot of contact with a lot of tenants who perhaps had autistic or ADHD, and they kind of realized they needed to do more work in ways that would fit actually responding to them and pushing out services to them that they felt happy to respond to. Next slide, please. So it is about gathering information on your tenants as well as finding solutions, and the digital has to be part of a range, and I think Rona will be talking a lot more about how digital sits within that range of engagement. I just recommend that you have a look at some of the cost of living, because we can only touch on it briefly today, but we did a series of cost of living between 2022 and 2024, which actually drilled down on what the impacts were for some of the diverse groups within your population of tenants, and what other organisations are doing to try and support people with disabilities, for example, or older people, and Black and minority ethnic communities, because that actually we need to have multiple, just as we need to have multiple channels to hear from our tenants, we need to have multiple channels to effectively engage with them. Next slide, please. I'll go on to the next slide. I'll leave that there for reference, but I just wanted to, if I could go on to the next slide, just so that I'm quicker. I just wanted to touch on this example from Freebridge Community Housing, because it's a small organisation. You may feel like, well, it's perhaps easier for bigger organisations that have a lot of clout or a lot of resources, but actually sometimes you can be closer to your communities and engage really well. But that, I think what we need to think about is how the digital solutions of engagement and providing support sit with perhaps wider support, and having a whole range of ways and being prepared to tailor the support solutions around the household. And I think that's really key. So Freebridge Community Housing has digital, prepaid energy and food vouchers, that short-term immediate support where people are in having a real crisis or a crunch. It's about keeping the lights on. It's that kind of immediate engagement. The vouchers that go by text, email, or delivered in person if needed. And you can see that over 2024, they've had a 9% increase on the vouchers that they've provided for people for that short-term support. But as well as that, they do keep a check on who's perhaps using repeated use of short-term support, so they can actually engage with them around what the bigger, longer term solutions might be. And amongst that, for example, with all the winter fuel payment issues, they have decided, they have set up that at the start of winter, they will contact all their over 75s to offer food parcels or winter warm packs. And for all tenants, actually, and we know that obviously EPC 3 is what we're aiming for, but we have some stock obviously that's still very difficult to upgrade, and they're doing a full initial 100% payment right at the start of winter for people who are in that condition, in that situation. And communal warm hubs, food hubs, for whether through point system or donations, that people can actually be referred to food hubs. So I think what we need to think about is how we fit digital within that raft of solutions we might have to hand to tailor around individuals, and also thinking about how we're best using the data we have on our tenants to understand who might be most in need and to target that support. So that's me with a rush through. Sorry for having taken a bit longer, and I'll just pass now back to Gemma and Rona. Hopefully it's given the context.
It really has, and it's like, see, when you start it, it's incredible how how we've all had to navigate all those changes, and you forget how long and how constant it's been as well. So that was super helpful. Thank you, Sarah. And it's just a reminder, if you've got any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A. We will hope to get to some of them at the end, but if not, we can absolutely follow up too. But thank you. Now over to Rona.
Hello, yeah, I'm Rona Penman. I'm not the Advice Service Coordinator anymore. I am the Welfare Rights and Debt and Money Advice Implementation Manager. Now, there's a mouthful. Thanks, Sarah, for setting that scene so graphically. I think I agree with everything you've said there, and very much, what we've tried to do in Link over the years. And like Gemma's saying, it's start to think how far back, this actually goes. Just a little personal story. I made a commitment to Link that I wouldn't retire until Universal Credit was fully migrated. Given that was supposed to happen in 2017, and I'm still here, however, I am retiring in 2 weeks' time. I've decided. I've done my bit. So moving on, next slide, please. What I'm going to talk about in terms of the session is really just a sort of session overview. Have a look at the challenges for our clients and for the business. Also, the solutions that we've come up with, as I say, a lot of what Sarah's talked about and some others, the what and the how, what we've done and how we've done it. Have a look at what outcomes we've achieved from that, and a few surprises along the way. In terms of the key messages I think I want to get across here is that digital technology, it's efficient. It's a really good use of resource, and we can reach a lot more people a lot easier using digital. It can be user friendly, if it's set up properly, tenants engage with it, and a lot of them tell us they prefer it. So in the main, they're loving it. It also promotes self-serve. Now, the advantage of self-serve is that frees up capacity for our frontline staff to focus on more vulnerable tenants who can't self-serve. So it's a win-win. So in terms of the challenges for clients, none of this will be a surprise to anybody. I think, the complexity of the benefit system, the lack of awareness from, tenants who are immersed in poverty and they just don't know where to turn. And even when they do know where to turn, there are so many barriers, there's so many challenges around engaging. Benefit underclaiming is massive. I think I was reading the other day, the billions of pounds a year in benefit underclaiming. And the other thing is that we're increasingly finding tenants who all of their benefits are in payment and they still can't afford the essentials. They're still having to choose between heating, eating and paying rent, that's a sort of change over the year. And that is exactly because of welfare reform. And obviously the UC managed migration is a huge challenge, particularly with the current employment support allowance group, who are more vulnerable, having to go through that process, and increasing tenant vulnerability. So next slide. So in terms of the challenges for the services, we're seeing an increased demand. And that's sort of year on year and isn't going away. We're also seeing a different client group coming through. So people who are in work, who are struggling and in poverty. We're very reactive because of the volume. We're just having to react to things, so we can't be as proactive as we would like to be, which is where the digital solutions come in. Non-engagement and disengagement, which is very frustrating for us. We know there's things we can do for people, but because of all of the barriers that they face, they won't engage. And the difficulty is, because they don't engage, we can't understand why they don't engage, because they don't engage to tell us, which is very frustrating. Increasing case complexity and the declining advisor morale and well-being, and that's back to them feeling that they're not able to make the same difference that they used to make. So next slide, please. So what solutions have we come up with in Link? Well, within our advice service, I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute, but we use Advice Pro case management system, which is it's a web-based system. So I'll talk a little bit about how we're using that. We've also got a tablet loan scheme that loans a digital solution to tenants who are currently digitally excluded. So there is no such thing as digital exclusion in Link. We give them data so they can use the tablet to engage with our services. We're using Lightning Reach, a tool called CS Feedback. Again, I'll talk about this in a bit more detail too. Local Insight, which is kind of tools that Sarah was talking about. We've got a partnership with Home Energy Scotland and use a digital portal for referrals. We've got a tenant app. We've got portable IT for frontline staff. We're using MS Forms. Again, we're finding that's a really good way to engage with tenants. And again, they seem to really like it. And a couple of not so digitally focused services, but still really, really helpful. Self-help coaching and how that's transformed how we can engage with tenants, and more importantly, giving them the tools to engage with us, and our home project, which is Help on Managing Everything, which is an intensive housing management tool. So next slide, please. So our advice service. We've got 15 staff. It's welfare rights and debt and money advice. We have moved to a remote service delivery model, and that was on the back of COVID. So it's very digitally focused. So we contact tenants through email, text message, etc. Tenants tell us they actually prefer that. In the past, we used to visit all of them at home. That was obviously very resource intensive. So moving to the remote model, we are actually dealing with 40% more cases than we did before with the same number of staff. So not only is it a much more efficient way to do service, as I say, tenants prefer it, but also from a sustainability agenda in terms of our carbon footprint. I think it was something like 170,000 miles of travel that we no longer do, which is obviously massive. Tablet loan scheme I've touched on. So the next ones are just our outputs for a year. So 3,000 cases, huge amount of work, over £3 million of benefit gain, and that's new benefits. So that's benefits that tenants weren't getting before that we've been able to secure for them. Dealt with over £400,000 of debt, and we're accredited to Scottish National Standards. In terms of debt, just thinking about sort of client vulnerability, etc., we've obviously got the new Financial Conduct Authority Consumer Duty. So again, that's a focus from a sort of regulatory point of view, that we need to be very aware of our tenants' vulnerabilities and make sure we're delivering services, that meet their needs. In terms of Advice Pro, that's, as I say, it's a web-based system. It's a case management system that's set up specifically for the sector. There's a lot of auto functions within it. So we can do things like send documents to tenants. They can send documents to us through the portal. They can sign documents, so signing mandates or signing forms for debt, whatever it is, all that can be done. There's appointment scheduling, and it also sends auto-generated text messages, reminders, that appointment's coming up, or you said you were going to send us this and you've not sent it, whatever. Also the financial statement, so that can be completed in the portal, so the client can do it at their end, and that's then shared with the advisor, and they can collaborate through the system, which is obviously really efficient. So next slide, please. So Lightning Reach, Gemma's obviously given an overview of the Lightning Reach portal, so I'm not going to repeat that. What we'll do though is have a look at how we're using it in Link. So all of our frontline staff are involved in the project. So we started on the 22nd of July last year. So our frontline teams are our advice service, our housing teams, our customer contact centre and our support staff. And we decided we wanted the whole organisation to be involved to reach as many tenants as possible. We trained all the staff on supporting tenants. Our expectation that as a lot of our tenants wouldn't manage an online platform and that they would need help to create their profile and be matched with their support and to make their applications. So we trained all of those frontline staff to be able to support more vulnerable tenants who wanted to access the portal. So far to date, we've delivered the message about Lightning Reach and the link directly to the platform to 10,500 tenants. We also created a referral pathway into our advice service. And we wanted to test most of our referrals, something like 98% of our referrals at the moment come in through other frontline staff. So they'll speak to a tenant, recognise that the tenant needs help with benefits or welfare or debt, and they will make the referral on the tenant's behalf. And that's auto-generated through our housing management system that then populates straight into our advice pro system. So again, very, very efficient. But we wanted to test a model where the tenant could self-refer through Lightning Reach into our service, and we want to see whether we get a different demographic of client coming through that. So we're now at the end of the first year, so we're going to be doing some evaluation to see whether that indeed has been the case. So next slide, please, Emma. So in terms of our communications around Lightning Reach, we sent targeted bespoke communications, and we focused on hard to reach groups first and then moved through with communications timetabled to maximise engagement. And I'll explain a little bit about that in a second. Each of the messages has its own unique URL, so we can track through the dashboard in Lightning Reach who has clicked on what message, how many of them created profiles, how many of them were matched with support and engaged with support, etc. So it gave us really good insight into our tenants that we didn't have, before. In terms of the timetabling, we started with single men because we recognise they're most at risk of tenancy failure. We sent out the message to them at 2 o'clock on the 22nd of July, and within 2 hours, 10% of them had logged on, created their profile and been matched with support. Now that tells us that those single men, and the reason they're most at risk of tenancy failure is they don't engage. Give them that tool, they actually were happy to engage, but they want to do it on their own terms. They don't want to put up their hand and ask for support, but they were more than happy, to log on and do that themselves. So that was a very powerful learning sort of message, for us. The next messages went out to pensioners, and that was at the time of the pension credit uptake campaign and when the winter fuel payment criteria was changed. And that message went out telling older people about Lightning Reach and also telling them about pension credit uptake, about, encourage them to get a benefit check, etc. Again, the message went out, and that day, although we thought pensioners aren't going to engage with this because pensioners are not digitally savvy and, all those sort of cliches that we think we know people, 80 of them signed up the same day. Were matched with, created their profile and were matched with support. And over the next couple of days, another 160 had done so, probably because they then spoke to family friends, to get a little bit of assistance, or indeed just to check, is this link, sort of okay to click on. The other thing that was incredibly important for us is that 26 tenants, older tenants, referred themselves to the advice service for a benefit check for pension credit uptake. That is unheard of. We don't get a huge number of our pensioners coming through unless they are coaxed and encouraged, by the frontline staff. So to have 26 of them volunteering to, generate that referral into advice, was massive. The next group got in touch with us Working Age on housing benefit, and that's our employment and support allowance caseload that we knew are going to migrate to universal credit before the end of the year. So again, the message went out about Lightning Reach, but also to say to them, at some point you're going to get a managed migration notice. We were able to put a graphic of what that would look like, and basically saying to them, you have to act on this, don't ignore it. It's got very dire consequences if you do, and if you need help, get in touch with us. So we had our contact details on there. The next group was lone parents, and then we did sort of everyone else. What we've done more recently, just over the last couple of months, is to start sending out reminder messages to each of the groups. And what we want to get across to tenants is that Lightning Reach is not a one and done. This is something that they can log on as many times as they like. They can update their profile if things change. They can look for different types of support if the circumstances have changed. So they might have needed energy advice before, or a fuel voucher. Maybe now they need, white goods or some support around mental health or debt or whatever it is. So they can go in as many times as they like. The other thing we wanted to get across is when we look at the outcomes, is that there is drop off between tenants opening the link but then not creating a profile, creating their profile and being matched with support and not engaging with support. So we wanted to remind them that that if they had got that far, here's how easy it is to do the next step. And we had little graphics of what to do and what to expect. And again, saying if you need help, then get in touch with us. So we used CX feedback, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail, but we had a whole raft of other sort of communication methods to just try and reach as many people as possible. We do a weekly review of the dashboard just to see how successful the various communication methods are. And because each of those different communication methods has got its own unique URL, if you like, we're able to track exactly, the most successful ways that tenants are engaging. We're also getting tenant and staff feedback, looking at how easy is the platform to use. Is there anything that we can be doing better with it? And also what difference is it making? So we're in the process of looking at some of that evaluation at the moment. So next slide, please. So in terms of our outcomes, so just over 1,000 tenants have been reached and sort of clicked on the link. 950 have created their profiles, so that's that sort of drop off that I was talking about. 640 have engaged with support. We've realised over £36,000 of sort of gains for tenants. 131 benefit checks completed. And this is a bit of a surprise. I'll talk about a bit more detail, but 94% have been able to self-serve. Now, given the vulnerabilities of social housing tenants, that is massive. And that's clearly showing just how easy the Lightning Reach portal is for people to use. And 125 referrals to Links Advice Service, which again is massive. So for that number of people to self-serve tells us that maybe we've actually created a pathway that tenants who were previously reticent about putting their hand up or speaking to their housing officer to say, I'm in trouble here, maybe we've created a way for them to come to us without, embarrassment. So that's something we're going to do a bit more work to analyse. So next slide. So in terms of the areas of need, yeah, no problem. So the red boxes are what people needed help with. So again, no surprises there. The blue is what were the biggest issues. Again, exactly what we would have probably predicted to see. And the green was the reasons for the difficulty. So, lack of essentials, significant change in circumstances, or a sudden change or decline in health. So next slide, please. So in terms of what surprised us, the effectiveness of CX feedback, the click rates is the term that they use. Up to 64% of people who were sent a message, clicked on it and engaged with it, which was really good. As I say, 94% of tenants empowered to help themselves, which is just massive. The resource saving, if we had to provide that level of service that Lightning Reach has been able to provide through the portal to all 1,000 staff, tenants, it would have been 21 weeks of officer time. So that's freeing up that time, back to what I was saying about that digital solution, freeing up time for officers to focus on the 6% of tenants who weren't able to self-serve. That engagement from our previously hard to reach tenants, so the single men and the pensioners, and the number of support matches, on average 36 for each profile. Staff were praised, and this was something that was really important. The tenants were really pleased that they were actually getting something positive, getting a message that was, here's something that can help you, and something that was actually able to help them. Because at the moment, you know, a lot of the stuff's gloom and doom. It's about rent arrears, it's about things that they need to do. And so to get something, a positive message that was actually able to make a difference, was really good for tenants, but it has improved the relationships with the housing colleagues, you know, with their housing officer, who are saying, you know, Link's doing something really good here. And that positive feedback coming back to the staff has given them a bit of a boost, that they're able to see that they're making a bit of a difference. And that's been really powerful. So next. So how successful has this been? Well, we've got awards. So we were successful in good practice in communicating with tenants and residents. It's the Landlord Award at the TPAS conference in June. And it was also awarded Service Development of the Year at the GFest in 2024. So not only are we thinking it's really good, but you know, the sector is obviously agreeing with us, which is really, really rewarding. So just very quickly run through a few of the other things that we're doing. So next slide, please. So CX Feedback, the communication portal, basically. So tenants agree to, you know, they give us permission to send these push notifications either by text message or by email. The messages can be made up in any way you like. We can embed links into it. We can embed documents into it. That's very, very high levels of tenant engagement, not just with Lightning Reach, but with everything that we've used CX Feedback for. And it's quick and easy to use, but you can also, you get a data use and a response dashboard from each of the messages, so you can see who's engaged with what they've done with it, etc. Have they clicked on the links? Have they opened the documents? Which is really good at trying to understand our tenants, and also about recognising where maybe the gaps are. You know, is there a demographic of tenant who's not engaging in this way, which helps us to focus on alternative methods for them, which is really good. So next slide is Local Insight. So Local Insight used to be called Community Insight, so it's reincarnated. But there's 1,500 regularly updated neighbourhood level indicators within there around benefits, you know, sort of income, debt, employment, training, that kind of thing. It brings place-based data together to support evidence-led decisions. So you can create your own areas for analysis. So we can map links stock areas into the platform, and that will start to tell us where our hotspots are for like disability benefits or unemployment, or you know, young people not in education and school. We can create maps and reports from the dashboard. So again, you know, they can be created bespoke to links areas and to link stock, which is really useful. So that allows us to have a look at service and resource planning. Again, back to looking at where these hotspots are, looking at where the gaps in services might be, and also if we've got service, where's the best place to start to deliver, you know, particular services based on the demographics. So the next slide is Home Energy Scotland. So we have a partnership with Home Energy Scotland, which we've had since 2017. The portal is an online portal, and staff can access it very, very easily. It takes literally less than a minute to generate a referral. Obviously, Home Energy Scotland are the experts in energy advice and support for our tenants. They can access emergency fuel vouchers through Fuel Bank Foundation, etc. And we also get outcome reports from the platform. So again, it's a really quick and easy way for us to get an expert service without really having to do very much other than send in the referral. The partnerships work really, really well. And as I say, it hinges on this portal that it's just so easy to use, but gives us useful information back again. So next slide, I think I've just maybe got one to go. Is this the last one? I think so. So the other solutions, we've got the tenant app. So again, it's promoting self-service. Tenants can report and book repairs. They can check the rent balance, etc. We've also got portable IT for staff, so they've now all got their iPads or whatever it is, the technology they're using now. They keep changing, what the actual product is. But basically, that allows staff to connect to the housing system in real time. So when they're out and about, if a tenant's got a question about something, they can log straight into the record in the housing management system and let them know exactly what's happened. They can also update, so if there's been a change in the tenancy, in the household composition, or a change in circumstances, that can be uploaded there and then, so that the tenant knows that their information's up to date. It's improved and faster customer service. Customers like it because it's much quicker. If they report something, it happens instantly, and the staff like it because it's really efficient. They don't need to come back with loads of paper notes, go back into the office or back home, then log on to the system and then do it. So it's creating a lot of efficiencies there. I mentioned the use of Microsoft Forms for surveys and tenant feedback. Again, all we need to do is send out the link to the survey. Tenant fills it in, it automatically populates, into the Excel spreadsheet. So we can sort the data, we can view the data, we can filter the data, we can do whatever we want with it. We always struggled to get satisfaction surveys completed from the advice service point of view. It's increased, I think it's about a 500 or 600% increase in the number of tenants who are now responding using the MS form. So that's worked really well. Self-help coaching. So self-help coaching we've used in a number of projects, and it's now available through just our sort of normal housing management. So basically, if a tenant volunteers, they can get up to 10 one-hour sessions with a self-help coach. And what that's doing is it's helping to break down some of the mental health barriers that tenants face in engaging with our services. So we used it in a money advice project 2 years ago, because we recognised that particularly with debt, there was huge amounts of disengagement and non-engagement, even when there was debt. But the self-help coaching was giving tenants the tools to recognise how best to engage and the importance of engaging with services, but putting them in a place where they felt able to do so. And we had huge success from that. So we've continued to invest in that. Our Help on Managing Everything project is basically, it's an intensive housing management project. So referrals are made from frontline staff who recognise that a particular tenant has maybe more intensive needs that the housing officer can deal with. And again, that in conjunction with self-help coaching, it's equipping tenants to manage their tenancies better. So, we're finding that tenancy sustainment rates are improved. Not that they were bad before, but they have improved for our very much more vulnerable tenants because they're now able to engage. So I think that's maybe my last slide.
Excellent. Thanks, Rona. Oh, and exclusive email access as well at the end.
Absolutely. I can put that up there because I won't be here in 2 weeks, so nobody will get me anyway.
2 weeks and that's it. So thank you so much, both of you. I think what's really been so helpful is just to sort of remind us, as I said at the beginning, of where we've been and where we're at now. Those stats are like incredible, just to hear that from a real life example of what's been happening. It's just so profound. So thanks for taking the time to go through that. Something that I took away certainly was like knowing who's behind your front door can be done in so many ways. I'm speaking to more and more housing associations up and down the UK who are doing big door knocks or getting to know you things. But there's so many ways. Like some people just don't want to answer the door to their landlord, and so digital is very much part of that solution too. I did have a few summary slides, but on the benefit of time, I don't think I'm going to go through all of them. But it's just really to hammer that point home of what we've all been talking about. There's so many people struggling financially up and down the UK. But this example, if I can skip to it, we've got some new partnerships developing all the time. There's some great stuff that's got some amazing reactions recently about our Step Change partnership and that warm handover that we can just make the journey easier. It's complex, it's messy, it's hard to navigate. Never mind when you're, dealing with a new move or whatever stage of tenancy you're at. So we are super interested in listening to our partners' experiences and evolving and changing from that. there's not just a picture of a random tap there for any reason. It's just we're you know, delving into partnerships with water companies, etc. too. Sarah on her slides alluded to the hack stuff, and we're partnering with them in the future also. So exciting things to come. I'm really, really sad, but we have run out of time. I'm aware that there are some questions, but I think in the benefit of finishing and not taking into your lunchtime, I think what we'll do is we'll respond to them on email if that's okay. And just want to take a moment just to thank both of you very, very much for your time and for everyone for joining the webinar today. I hope you found it useful and look forward to getting back to all of your questions in the next few hours. So thank you so much, ladies, and have a good afternoon, everyone. Oh,
Thanks,
there's
everybody.
enjoy your retirement from Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mic drop, Rona.